This concludes our introduction to the presentation components using CAT, building out what the instructor will give as the lecture of the course. Now we're going to move over to the lesson companions. The lesson companion, each lesson will acts as sort of like a quiz to check if the student is following along, and they can fill this out as the lesson progresses. The ideal situation is a student will be taking notes while they watch the instructor, and then they can also glance at their lesson companion every now and then to see if something the instructor said relates to a question that is seen inside of this lesson companion. It's going to really stick in their brain if the instructor says for the first time an object is an instance of a class. Well, then they might hear that, and then they'd see this trivia question like, oh, a class is an instance of an object. Well, that can't be right because the instructor just told me that an object is an instance of a class. So then you click false and you'd see, oh, cool. Correct. An object is an instance of a class. Or maybe you would hear the instructor wrong and you would say true. And then you would also get this feedback that would tell you this is the actual answer. And, try and fill in those gaps in knowledge, because this is something confusing that a lot of people, I think, learning object-oriented programming struggle with. And so just when you're designing this curriculum, think about, for whatever topic or whatever course you're building, what confused you when you started learning this stuff, and try and empathize as much as you can. So I have this is of course a big one for OOP, and in JavaScript, classes cannot have more than one constructor method. It's going to be true. They can only have that one constructor method in JavaScript. And then in our Trivia 3, we talk about kind of the storing fields, and if you store data in some field of a class, is it accessible to all instances of that class? Well, that's false, because the static fields, yes, but not just a regular field. At this point, they haven't learned about statics, and that wasn't part of the question. But yeah, so that's kind of what carries them through here. And we can see what that looks like in code as well. We have this multiple choice component that is a part of this document component. The document is a little bit more generic than the presentation. The presentation, we saw under a presentation, you had a bunch of slide templates, but under a document, we just have directly going into the actual titles and other components that we saw were only in slide templates in our presentations, but are now right directly as children of the document component. So we saw with these multiple choice here, we can see the code for that is this multiple choice block where we can have the question and then all the different answers. So in all of my multiple choice blocks here, I only define 2 answers, but you could hypothetically have as many as you want. Probably limit it to 4. Maybe there's a good use case for 5 or 6 in one case or the other. But so then you can see in these answers, there is one answer that is annotated correct, and all the answers can have feedback if you so choose. So in our next multiple choice question here, it looks like I chose not to use feedback. Maybe I just felt it wasn't needed for whatever question. But in this case, I thought when they click the wrong answer, tell them this because we want this to stick in their brain. When they click the correct answer, tell it to them again just because we want it to stick. Get them to read it as many times as they can if you feel it's one of those things that gets forgotten very easily. The next subject of our lesson companions, and probably one of the more complicated things that we do when we're building our curriculum, is designing a coding exercise. Right here, you can see we have creating a class problem. So there's something wrong with my code. I can't instantiate a new instance of my class. What's wrong? Looking closely here, we can see that there's color here. That is, we're trying to set the this.color of the fruit, and we didn't pass through the color in the constructor. So we add color, and then great job. It's able to console.log. It instantiates the class correctly, and there's the output. So we'll revert that back to what it was before we did anything. And then let's take a look at the code. So we can see in this code exercise component, we have a title and then an instruction. That seems pretty straightforward. It looks like my title, I didn't really need to have 2 titles here. It looks like I did an H2, and then after the H2, I put another title. Probably a little unnecessary, so maybe watch out for that when you guys are designing. But then we have some instructions, and you can see here's all of our setup of the actual coding. So we give them some starter code, and we can see the starter code. When they load the page, this is the code that they get before they do anything. And we have our test. So the test, every time they change the code, it's going to run the test. The test, you can see if the fruit class is undefined, throw an error. If calling the fruit class as a function like this is going to throw an error. We also test that they're able to create a banana fruit here with these two different fields. And we check that the color is yellow. With that knowledge of how the test works, let's go in here and correct it. And then so now it's great job. With our tests, it gets really difficult to catch every single little error they could possibly have, but we do the best we can with the tests. And so just whatever you think is going to allow them to understand how this JavaScript code works is going to be sufficient for them to get the experience they need writing some code. But the next thing that I want to talk about in terms of lesson companions, we can see we just have more class problems where we have different tests, different problems. So this one, it was like curly braces. So they didn't create the constructor method in this case. And in this case, they forgot to use this.floor, the this keyword, to reference their properties of the class. So just little stuff like that is good for learning. The next thing I want to show you is that we can actually write coding exercises in other languages too. If we go and we check out Introduction to HTML and we check out their lesson companion for Introduction to HTML, we can see here that it's asking us to write an HTML skeleton. So we know that that's going to be our $doc type, and then we've got our HTML, and then we've got our head. It wants us to make a head and end head. Oh wait, no, we want to have a, nope. Does it want us to do title? No, it doesn't want, it just wants head. So we'll do head, and then we'll do body, and then we'll end body, and then we'll end our HTML. And let's see, it says great job. So this is the ideal solution, I would think, is that you want to create your HTML skeleton just like this. But if we go over to the test, you'll see here how we're testing this one in this code exercise is we're testing it. We set the language to HTML, which is really great because then it's going to render it as HTML. So this is different than our last one where it was JavaScript. So in this one, we're testing that the code that they write contains this doc type, contains this HTML, contains this head, contains this body. So what we can do then, hypothetically here, is we could just write doc type head body, just body, just like that. And is there anything else that we forgot? Oh, and HTML. And so technically, if we wrote it like that, we could still get the great job. And so I just wanted to bring this to your attention that like some of these tests, it's really hard to write the test to be perfect in all cases. There's going to be edge cases like this where it's like, yeah, hypothetically, they could get it right, but still be wrong. This is okay for most of the cases. We just want to make sure that if they're following along in the lecture, if they're writing down the same kind of things that they're seeing the instructor teach, that they should be able to get this right answer. They should be writing it in the right way. We're going to run as many tests as you need to, and do the best you can. And don't be afraid if there is little edge cases like this. Last thing I wanted to show you in our lesson companions is we can do CSS too. So if we head over to the lesson companion for our CSS class here, you can see we have our HTML right here as our starter code. And then within here, we can go and it wants to create this main as a flex container. So we'll grab that main tag. We will add the display property, display, and set it to flex. And so now we'll click out of there and check it out. So the output is that it gets that style. This language here, it's still HTML, but now in the HTML, we actually wrote CSS code. Notice we have these properties, these new properties for show DOM and show console. The show DOM just means that like this is the actual document object model. They've probably got it in the cat library. Maybe they've put it in like an iframe or something that we populate with this code or something like that. But is how I imagine it works. But just so you know, for building these HTML exercises, we could have them create a web page inside of the lesson companion, which is pretty cool. So if let's set this show console to true, just because let's check out what that looks like as well. We could probably do our console.log in JavaScript or something, and it would populate there. So something cool you can do with your lesson companion. So that is CSS, that's HTML, that's JavaScript. We probably have the ability to write Python and maybe some other languages too. But yeah, so that's kind of the gist of making your lesson companion.